Hello guys and welcome to another video on my channel. I'm going to be doing another roundup video for all the films that I watched in January. So overall I watched a total of 24 films including short films, which I'm going to discuss in this little roundup video. Also guys, if there's any particular films that you want me to talk about, definitely leave them in the comments below and I'll watch them for next month's roundup video. Also I'm going to be putting timestamps down below for those of you who want to skim through the video. So without any further ado, let's talk about these films. I watched She Dies Tomorrow. I absolutely love the concept of this film. It touches on this idea of mortality and the fact that we could ultimately succumb to death at any given point in our life, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people have gone through at least one point in their life, so I really loved that aspect. However, some of the dialogue in this sort of comes off really comical and comedic, which ultimately makes it feel like the tone of the film was very mixed, and I wasn't necessarily a fan of this weird tone shift. And on top of that, there wasn't necessarily a lot of narrative plot points. It was sort of just a basic premise. I mean, it did look quite good visually. I love the colors that it used, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of stuff that I liked about this film. I would honestly rate this a 2.5 out of 5. I also watched Michael Haneke's Funny Games, the 1997 version. I was quite conflicted about this film because I liked it and I didn't like it at the same time. On the one hand, I like how the film is very satirical and nihilistic, but ultimately this is the aspect which I didn't like about the film at the same time. Although I acknowledge Haneke's commentary on movie violence and the way he subverts narrative conventions, there wasn't a whole lot of development both in the plot and the characters. The performances were great and I love Arno Frisch's performance. The way he portrayed this psychopath with a very calm and composed demeanor was brilliant, and it honestly scared the crap out of me. Perhaps I might need to give this film a rewatch or at least watch the American version. I would rate this one a 3.5 out of 5. I also watched Nosferatu. I thought that this film did a great job of building tension through the score and also the way that it uses lighting. I thought that the shadows in this film were used in a very creative way. I also liked the performance by Matt Schreck, who played the infamous role of Count Orlok. I thought that he did an amazing job at that, and I thought that it was super creepy. You can clearly see the influence that it has on horror films. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. I also watched Your Name Engraved Herein, and this is a slow-paced LGBT film. I love the way that this film represents the difference between traditional and modern day perspectives to homosexuality and how it portrays this through the passing of time. Performances were very strong and the atmosphere was very romantic, very moody, quite angsty at some points. Overall, I had quite a good time watching this film, and if you want to hear my full review of this film, head over to my channel and watch my full review. I would rate this film a 3.5 out of 5. I also watched Damien Chazelle's short film, The Stunt Double, and this was shot on an iPhone 11 Pro. This short film is an ode to classic film styles throughout history, such as westerns and musical, except the entire shtick of this film is that it sort of dubs itself as vertical cinema, and I just wasn't a fan of this entire vertical cinema thing. I think that it's very pretentious, and honestly it didn't really look that good. It ultimately just felt like an Apple advert on Snapchat. It was just so pretentious and I just wasn't a fan of this film. I would rate this like a 1 out of 5. I also watched Damien Chazelle's other short film, Whiplash. Even though it's clearly not as strong as the feature-length version, I still think that this film did a great job of building tension, suspense through visual mediums. Johnny Simmons' performance was not particularly as good as Miles Teller. I thought it was just pretty much average. However, the thing that I like about this film, that it uses a great amount of sound design, which I really liked. Even though it was 17 minutes long, it still managed to give me the same type of anxiety as the feature-length version. I really did enjoy this film. I would rate this a 3.5 out of 5. I also watched The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. I guess I went into this film with too much of a high expectation. It was a lot more slow-paced than I had imagined, which I didn't really expect. I thought this film would be more outlandish and crazy in terms of the visual gags. However, I do love what he was trying to say about the upper class. Nonetheless, I thought that this film was very entertaining and I would definitely appreciate this film more upon rewatching, so I'm definitely gonna have to rewatch this. I would rate this a 3.5 out of 5. I also watched an independent film called Ham on Ride. It's best to go into this without knowing what the hell this film is about. So without spoiling it, this film had a lot of visual aesthetic, a catchy soundtrack, and an overall fun atmosphere for the first half. However, it relies too heavily on style over substance in my personal opinion. There's a particular metaphor that this film is trying to portray, which I won't spoil, but I will say that this is really the only novelty of the film. So yeah, if you strip back the visual aesthetic and the music of this film, you'll end up with a film that's ultimately quite boring and just a little bit pretentious for my taste. Although a lot of indie film lovers will definitely appreciate this film, and I can definitely see it up there with the likes of other A24 films, but it's just not for me, so I would rate this one a 2.5 out of 5. I also watched Showgirls, which was very entertaining, to say the least. This film has honestly a lot to say about what a woman's value is, alongside some criticisms of the entertainment industry. The same way that it sexualizes the female actors in this film, it also portrays how men are sort of the ones who are perpetuating this cycle of sexualization. So it does have some very serious themes, but what I do like about this film is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. It does a great job of tackling these subject matters in a very entertaining way. The performance was very over the roof. This film is just so unapologetic, and that's what I love about this film. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. I also watched Pieces of a Woman. Vanessa Kirby's performance was the highlight of this film, along with the cinematography. The first 30 minutes of this film just gave me anxiety. If you want to watch my full review of this film, just head over to my channel and you can watch my full review. I would rate this one a 4 out of 5. I also watched Bong Joon-ho's debut film, Barking Dogs Never Die. Although it's not as thematically heavy as Bong Joon-ho's other films, the charm of this film is that it's so simple and it's just so silly to the point that you just have to laugh. The comedy in this is quite dark and quite morbid, especially if you're a dog lover, so that, you know, trigger warning for anyone who hasn't watched this film. Even though this is Bong Joon-ho's first film, you can still see his craft and how careful he is as a filmmaker. There are a lot of shots which I liked about this film, along with some very memorable sequences. For example, the chase scene. Also, the jazz soundtrack in this was very nice to listen to. I would rate this one a 3.5 out of 5. I also watched Haine for the first time. There's nothing else I can say about this film apart from that it's just a masterpiece in terms of the visual, the performances, the themes, and just the storyline altogether. I think that everything about this film is perfect. A lot of shots throughout this film look like photographs and they convey so much meaning. The camera moves so fluidly and with such precision, and I love how Paris is sort of portrayed in this very gritty and realistic way, as opposed to, you know, how it's normally portrayed in films and in cinema. Performances blew me away, especially from Vincent Cassel. He honestly did such a great job of being this person who is just so full of hatred. If you haven't watched this film, I would definitely recommend it. It's a masterpiece. I would rate this a 5 out of 5. I watched The Woman Who Ran, which is the latest film by Hong Sang-soo. It follows a woman who meets 3 separate friends whilst her husband is away on a business trip. So what I love about this film is how intimate and sensitive these conversations are among the 3 individual friends. It's as if we're witnessing old friendships rekindling throughout the film. Particular conversations are almost an inner reflection of what these characters are going through emotionally. The main character, Gam-hee, admits that she hasn't seen her friends in a long time, mainly because that her husband is quite dependent on her. Whilst this is, you know, just something that she mentions in one of the early scenes, it really goes to show you how, you know, she's quite lonely on the inside. Looking back at it, this film is just very realistic. It's almost like we're looking at actual conversations happening before our very eyes. This was a very great film. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. I watched a film called Megan is Missing, and the reason I watched this film is because it was trending online, so I just decided to see what the hype was all about. At the end of the day, this film is not worth watching. Genuinely concerned whether the director was like a sexual predator for the way that he was like exploiting these underage actors in the film. Honestly, they were just being portrayed in such a sexual way, which I really didn't like. This film is by no means a social commentary, or nor was it educational for whatever purpose. I know that some people have said that, you know, this brings awareness to like child trafficking, but I completely disagree. I thought that this film was just completely sexually exploitative, especially with these underage actors. This film is not raising awareness to anything. You know, you can talk about child trafficking without actually exploiting the actors in this film, which is exactly what the film did. There is no artistic integrity to this film whatsoever. Yeah, I would not recommend this film to anyone, and honestly, I would rate this 0 out of 5. I also watched Night Stalker, which is the latest Netflix series. What I liked about this film was that the serial killer Richard Ramirez wasn't glorified, unlike other films about serial killers, and I like the way that this film approaches this investigation from the point of view of the detectives. This was a very binge-worthy series, and I would recommend you guys watch this. I would rate this a 3 out of 5. And I also watched Gone Girl for the first time, and I wasn't necessarily blown away by this film. I thought that the story was somewhat compelling, but I just wasn't a fan of the plot twist near the middle of the film. I think Fincher Fincher did a great job of direction overall, but it was just a bit too left field for my taste, especially the whole plot twist thing. Okay guys, so in the middle of recording, my camera just died, so I'm just gonna record the sound for the rest of the video, so apologies for that. Visually, it was okay, and performance by Ben Affleck was just mediocre. However, I did like Rosamund Pike's performance. Overall, I just found this to be a pretty average film. I'm not saying it's a bad film, I'm just saying it's not necessarily my taste, but perhaps I might need to give it a rewatch. So Gone Girl, I would rate it a 3 out of 5. I also watched Phantom of the Opera. This film was quite conflicting. I absolutely loved it, but it hasn't really aged well in terms of its portrayals of people with deformity, but then again, it was made in the 1920s. Nonetheless, this film was great at building suspense. The climax of the film was very intense, especially for a silent film. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. I also watched Ratcatcher, which is the debut film by Lynn Ramsey. It's essentially a portrait of remorse and guilt through the eyes of this young child. So it does a great job of portraying loneliness and how this young boy is sort of alone in the world and how he sort of finds solace with this young girl. Overall, it's very gritty, it's very raw, and it tackles some very heavy themes. It's a really great debut film. I would rate this film a 4 out of 5. I also watched Pride and Prejudice, and I'm not normally a fan of period dramas, but for some reason this one kept me hooked. The storyline was pretty decent and the script was fantastic, but I wasn't necessarily a fan of the on-screen relationship between Elizabeth and Darcy. I didn't particularly find the relationship that convincing or genuine, which was quite a shame because I feel like the whole romantic aspect of the film is what keeps the audience watching, but I wasn't necessarily convinced. On the other hand, I thought that costume set pieces were great. I thought also the supporting cast was good in this film, and I would rate it a 3.5 out of 5. And I also watched Becoming Jane. In my personal opinion, it's not as good as Pride and Prejudice. However, the on-screen relationship between James McAvoy and Anne Hathaway was a lot more convincing and genuine. On the other hand, I wasn't necessarily as engaged as I thought I would be, which is quite a shame because honestly, for a story about Jane Austen's life, I thought that it would be more bold and defying, but it kind of just felt a bit dull, and I wish that the story would have focused more on her life as a writer instead of just focusing more on the romantic part. I would probably rate this a 2.5 out of 5. I watched In the Cut, directed by Jane Campion. This story is not engaging and it left me quite bored halfway through. However, I absolutely love the tone and atmosphere of this film. It's very 2000s in the best way possible. It's dark and gritty, especially combined with the performances from the lead actors. I also love the camera work in this. It looks very stylish and mesmerizing, almost like the film takes place in a hazy dream. If the story was a lot better, I would have loved this film, but it just feels like something that should have been left as a crime novel. Overall, I like this film for its visual aesthetic and atmosphere. I would rate this a 3 out of 5. I watched a short film called Pinki, which explores childhood and nostalgia through an absurd concept. I love the message that this film had. It's something that will resonate with a lot of people. In addition, I absolutely love the costume design in this. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. I also watched Taken. This film is the type of film you just watch to be entertained, and I was pretty entertained for the most part. The script was a bit of a mess. Even the infamous I don't know who you are scene didn't really click well with me. However, the action sequences redeemed this film. Liam Neeson was also quite badass in this. I would rate this a 3 out of 5. I watched 13 Going on 13. I thought that this film was such a mess. It's like the director didn't know if he wanted to make a kids movie or an adult comedy. At one point it's a film about youth and innocence, and then the next moment it's making sex jokes. Like, what's up with that? Also, it has some very mildly pedophilic undertones, which was a bit questionable. I would rate this a 1 out of 5, and that 1 star goes to Mark Ruffalo. I watched a short film called Giant God Warrior Appears in Tokyo. The monster in this film was based off a design by Hayao Miyazaki, and I thought that it looked pretty badass. There's not much to say about this except I'd love to see a feature-length version. And finally, I watched Paddington, and I really liked it. It's a great kids movie that even adults can watch. It touches on family, friendship, and being yourself in a way that captures the warmth of a 90s family film, except the CGI was actually pretty decent in this. The color palette in this film was also surprisingly eye-catching in the way that it used primary colors. It's just an overall fun time, and I'm looking forward to watching the sequel, which I've actually heard was a lot better. I would rate this a 4 out of 5. But that's just my opinion, guys. Thank you for watching another video on my channel. That's all 27 films I watched in January. Again, if there's anything that you want me to watch and discuss, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll review it for next month's roundup video. And yeah, that's all I can say. Thank you guys again for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.